All right, welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a pretty hefty topic, some seriously complex stuff.
Absolutely.
We've got an article here, and it dives headfirst into international relations.
It really does.
Specifically, the war in Ukraine and, where America stands in all of this.
Yeah, it's a fascinating piece. And the author, doesn't pull any punches. They come right out and say there's a major imbalance here.
Okay, an imbalance like what?
Well, you've got Ukrainian President Zelenskyy, right, pushing really hard for security guarantees from the U.S.
Security guarantees, so meaning the U.S. would fully commit to defending Ukraine.
Exactly, boots on the ground. And the article argues that he's demanding this, even making it a precondition for any peace talks with Russia.
That's interesting, especially because, you've got some European countries, right?
Yeah.
Geographically, they're way closer to the conflict than the U.S. is.
Right.
But they haven't exactly been rushing to beef up their own defense contributions.
That's a very good point. The article hones in on a particular speech that Zelenskyy gave.
Oh, which one?
At the World Economic Forum in Davos, remember that?
Oh, yeah.
He went off, really laid into European nations for not doing enough to protect themselves, basically.
Yeah, he wasn't exactly subtle about it. I remember.
Not at all. And then, to go even further, to say the U.S. sending troops to Ukraine is a non-negotiable starting point for any talks with Russia.
Wow. Okay, so that's a pretty strong stance to take.
It is. And what the author really picks up on is the tone that Zelenskyy used.
Like how he was saying it.
Yeah. The article makes this point about how he seemed to be talking to, former U.S. President Donald Trump, almost like he was some underling, like laying down the law, giving orders, not really trying to have a two-sided conversation,
I see.
It's a really interesting observation because that's the core of their argument. They say this whole approach, it's dangerous. Trump should just say no.
So the author is advocating for the U.S. to just, step back from the Ukraine war completely.
Well, they're advocating for a big change in U.S. foreign policy for sure. They want the U.S. to disengage from direct involvement in Ukraine and really push Europe to take charge of its own defense.
Okay, that's a huge shift.
It is, and the article acknowledges all the questions that come with that. Like, what happens if the U.S. withdraws? Can Europe really fill that void, militarily speaking?
Right.
And then there's that constant balancing act for the U.S. How do you support your allies without getting dragged into these conflicts that could easily get out of control?
Yeah, it's a delicate situation for sure. Things could go south pretty quickly if the wrong move is made.
No doubt about it. This is high-stakes stuff. Yeah, no question. One wrong move and things could really spiral out of control.
So the article also mentions some specific things that Trump might do, right, to try and kind of de-escalate things.
Right. And this is where it gets really interesting, I think, from a policy standpoint.
Yeah.
The author suggests that Trump might use economic tools to try and force Russia's hand a little, pressure them into actually negotiating with Ukraine.
Economic tools, like sanctions and stuff?
Yeah, they talk about taxes, tariffs, sanctions, the whole 9 yards, basically, as a way to inflict some real economic pain and force them to the negotiating table.
It makes sense in theory, but the article also brings up some pretty big challenges with that approach, right? I remember reading that the U.S. doesn't actually have that much direct trade with Russia.
Exactly. That's a huge hurdle right there. And even if we did, even if there were more robust trade ties, sanctions aren't always, the magic bullet that people think they are.
Yeah, that's true. We've already seen how Russia has been able to kind of weather previous sanctions, right?
Exactly. They adapt their economy, find ways to get around things. It's not easy to completely cripple them with sanctions alone.
Right. The article also mentions that Trump might lean on Saudi Arabia and some other Middle Eastern oil producers, try to get them to lower oil prices.
Interesting.
The idea being, I guess, that if you hit Russia's energy revenues, that'll really put the squeeze on them.
That's a strategy that could have some serious ripple effects, though. The global oil market, it's incredibly complex and volatile. Trying to, manipulate oil prices by getting other countries to just cut production. That's a huge gamble.
Right. And it could totally backfire too, couldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You could end up with price spikes, even global shortages. It's really unpredictable.
And let's not forget, Saudi Arabia, these other oil-producing nations, they've got their own interests to worry about.
Of course.
They're not just going to do whatever the U.S. wants.
Right. Especially if it hurts their bottom line. It's a delicate balancing act for them.
Right. Weighing the benefits of working with the U.S. against, what it might cost them.
Yeah. And their relationships with other countries, that's another factor they have to consider. It's a really tricky situation all around.
The article goes even deeper, too. It talks about some of the stuff that might have been going on behind the scenes. Like, they suggest that some officials might have actually misled Trump during his first term, when it came to Ukraine. But now the author says that Trump is more aware of the complexities and, maybe better equipped to handle the situation.
That's a fascinating angle. It really highlights how important intelligence and diplomacy are, right?
Yeah.
They shape a leader's understanding of a conflict, influence their decisions. Having good information, sound advice, it's essential in these high-stakes situations. I mean, one little piece of misinformation could have huge consequences.
Absolutely. The article also really emphasizes how, Zelensky is playing his own game here, pushing hard for those American security guarantees before he's even willing to sit down with Putin. They even point out that the Biden administration wasn't willing to go that far.
It really raises a fundamental question, doesn't it?
Yeah, what?
Where's the line between supporting an ally, right, and jeopardizing your own national security? It's the dilemma that policymakers are always facing.
Yeah, and there's no easy answer. It's about weighing the pros and cons of getting involved, right? The benefits versus the costs and risks.
Exactly. And those calculations are constantly shifting, right? What seemed like a good idea a few months ago could be a disaster today. You're constantly reevaluating.
It's like trying to navigate a maze in the dark or something,
Exactly.
right? You're feeling your way forward, constantly reassessing your options, changing course as new information comes in.
Yeah, and there are always those unforeseen obstacles, unexpected turns, It's all about adapting and reassessing the situation.
It really does feel like Zelensky's putting all his eggs in the American basket, hoping the U.S. will be there no matter what. But the article, they suggest this could backfire big time.
Yeah, I mean, that's a central point they make. Zelensky's demands, they might actually weaken his position. Think about it. He might be pushing away those European allies who, might already be on the fence about contributing more.
Right, because if they feel like the U.S. is going to pay for everything, take on all the risk, why should they bother?
Exactly. And this feeds into that bigger debate, the one about burden sharing in NATO, right? Historically, the U.S. has been the muscle, the big military power, but there's been this push for a while now, other members, especially in Europe, to step up their game.
Yeah, increase defense spending, take more responsibility for security in their own backyard.
And this conflict, it's really brought those tensions out into the open. The author even suggests, maybe if the U.S. did take a step back, it would force those European nations to finally get serious about their own defense.
That's a risky move, though, isn't it? I mean, you could end up with a weaker NATO, more divided, and wouldn't that be a gift to Russia?
There are no guarantees, right? It's so complex, so many factors at play. But the article, they make a pretty strong argument that the way things are going, it's not sustainable. The U.S. can't be the world's police forever.
It's interesting. The author seems to be saying that this war, this whole situation with Ukraine, it's like a wake-up call.
Yeah, a moment for the U.S. to really think about its commitments around the world.
Reassess, prioritize its own interests.
That's an idea that's gaining some traction, especially with those who believe that the U.S. is, overextended militarily.
That it's time to focus on problems here at home.
Right.
Well, this article definitely gave us a lot to chew on. So many provocative points and some really tough questions. What's the best way for the U.S. to support its allies, without putting itself at risk? Is a more hands-off approach better in the long run?
These are the questions policymakers, experts, everyone, they'll be debating this for years to come. And there are no easy answers. Every option comes with risks, potential consequences. It's a tough situation all around.
This deep dive, it really shows you how complicated international relations are, how much uncertainty there is. Every decision has these ripple effects, and trying to predict what will happen, it's like trying to predict the weather months in advance. You just never really know.
It's a constant process, assessing the situation, adapting, learning from past mistakes, hopefully. That's the best we can do.
Well, there you have it, folks. A deep dive into a truly complex and honestly controversial issue. Subscribe to our podcast, which is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube.